Next session is on Sharia law and citizenship rights, and is chaired by Andrew Copson. Please, Andrew, you'll introduce your panel. I have to say that Ibn Warraq is backed by popular demand, I think, on this session.
Thanks very much. This is a far less amusing hour and a half. We've got a great panel, though. I'd like to invite them up to the front here. We've got Johann, Maryam Namazie, Ibn Warraq, Roy Brown, and Mahin Alipour. Yeah. Thank you. And we're going to be discussing Sharia law and citizenship rights. So,
I think we should have called it "How do you solve a problem like Sharia?"
the alternative title, the subtitle, we are funny, you see, on this panel as well, is "How do you solve a problem like Sharia?" Thanks to... Well, there are lots of issues that we hope to cover in the next hour and a half or so. We're going to be looking around the world, not just at Europe and the UK, and we're going to be looking not just at Sharia, but the other effects, less informal, of political Islam in this country and other countries around the world. I'd like to start by thinking about the world as a whole, and beginning with Mahin. Mahin, you have experience of the workings of Islamic law in a number of countries. Perhaps you could start by giving us an insight into how this system works outside of Europe, and to the sort of people who are the victims, as you see it, of this law, especially women, which I know is a particular interest of yours.
وقتی که من به اروپا اومدم مجبورم یه مقدار از بیوگرافی خودم بگم.
When I came to Europe, I want to start with a bit of my biography first.
من مهندس بودم توی ایران و به خاطر گرفتن طلاق مدت‌ها مخفی بودم توی ایران. سه تا بچه داشتم و سالها تلاش کردم که یه طلاق ساده بگیرم. به هر حال هیچ گارانتی تو زندگی نیست.
I was an engineer in Iraq, and for a simple reason that I wanted to get a divorce, I had I had to stay in hiding for a few years in Iran. I had 3 children, and all I wanted was a simple divorce. There is no guarantee in life.
اجازه نداشتم کار کنم به خاطر شوهر سابقم و زمانی که دیگه ایشون از لحاظ مالی وضعش خراب شد به من اجازه کار داد.
I was not allowed to work because my ex-husband didn't give me the permission to work, and only when he didn't have a financial support to support us, he allowed me to start work.
وقتی که صاحب اولیه من اجازه داد که برم کار کنم، وقتی رفتم تقاضای کار کردم گفتن که این رشته تو مردونه است، مهندسی هیدرولیک بود و شما زمان شما رو خوردین و باید بشینی خونه.
When finally my owner, that is my husband, allowed me to go to work, they didn't let me to work because they said that the subject, the area of my work, which was engineering, electronic engineering, was a male kind of work, and women were not allowed to work. And just because I have been educated in a different regime, that doesn't mean that I was allowed to work.
یه روز یه دونه آگهی دیدم تو روزنامه که گفتن همچین مهندسینی پذیرفته میشن زن در صورتی که تعداد مردا کم باشه.
I saw an ad in newspaper one day that they were actually asking for women in that particular subject to go to work, and that was subject to if there weren't enough men to work there.
به هر حال من رفتم اونجا و خوشبختانه تعداد مردا کم بودن، شاید چون جنگ ایران عراق بود جبهه رفته بودن، ولی من پذیرفته شدم.
I went for the job, and fortunately, because of the war, there weren't enough men to do the work, and I was finally accepted to work.
اجازه نداشتم جلسات مهندسین رو برم چون تنها کارشناس زن بودم، نه تنها روسری باید چادر سرم میکردم و یه دونه نمازخونه جدا برای من درست کرده بودم.
I was not allowed to attend meetings because I was the only woman, professional woman working there. I had to wear both the head cover and also chador that covers all my body. And they had designed only one prayer room only for myself.
فقط رئیسم با من کار میکرد و وقتی که من میرفتم اونجا دائم چشماش به سقف اتاق بود.
Only my boss was allowed to talk to me, and when he was speaking to me, he always looked up to the roof.
به هر حال زمانی که اون برگه قرارداد کارم به من دادن، من با خوشحالی قلمو برداشتم که امضا کنم. دیدم که ورقو کشید کنار، گفت که این مال شوهر شماست، ایشون باید امضا کنن.
When I finally was happily going to sign my contract, he took the paper away from me and he said, "You're not allowed to sign it. This is for your husband to sign."
به هر حال من خوشحال بودم، از خونه میزدم بیرون و رفتم سر کار. یه راننده مرد برای من استخدام کردن چون من باید مأموریت میرفتم و همه کارشناسای مرد خودشون رانندگی میکردن ولی من یه راننده داشتم.
I was happy that I was finally going to work, but they had to get a driver, a male driver for me. All my colleagues were driving themselves because they were men, but they had to get me a driver to drive me around.
حقوقم کمتر از مردا بود و ماهی یک بار با وجودی که چادر و روسری و همه چیز و خودم رو فقط به صورت یه شبح سیاه می‌دیدم، هر ماه یک نامه تهدیدنامیز میومد که فلان روز چند تا تارمود بیرون بود.
It was a lot of regulations and limitations for us, even though that I was covering myself all the time and I was trying to obey all the laws and regulations. I always got threatening letters telling me that I had a few strands of my hair showing.
به هر حال چون متعلق به دانشجوی چپ بودم و انقلاب و که به هر حال به شکست رسید تجربه کرده بودم، شروع کردن به دستگیری و مسائل این چنینی و من مجبور شدم که اون کشور رو ترک کنم.
Finally, because I was uneducated, I belonged to a left kind of ideas, and I was starting to get to do some activities. I had to leave my country.
به محض ورودم به سوئد نگاه میکردم که چطور میتونم طلاق بگیرم و حقیقتا کمتر از 1 سال شد که تونستم این کارو بکنم و تصمیم گرفتم که به هر حال خودم زندگی کنم با توجه مشکلاتی که داشتم و سرپرستی بچه‌ام داشته باشم.
Once I got to Sweden, the only thing in my mind was how to get a divorce, and finally after a year I managed to do so, and I tried to get a job and get the custody of my children finally.
به هر حال این اتفاقات خوب تو زندگی من افتاد، ولی بعد از مدتی دیدم که مثلا چیزای عجیبی دیدم. سن ازدواج برای دختران خارجی، بالفرض دخترانی که از ایران و کشورهایی که سن ازدواج پایین تو اونا میان 15 ساله، در صورتی که سن ازدواج توی سوئد 18 سال بود.
I was lucky anyway that there had been lots of good lucky events in my life, but eventually when I got to know the society I realized that there were a lot of discrimination. For example, I realized that the age of marriage for foreign girls in Sweden was much lower. It was 15 years old.
گتوها رو دیدم و مناطقی رو که مردم توی فرهنگ خودشون میموندن و زنها پشت درای بسته کتک میخوردن و بچه‌ها آزار دیده میشدن.
I realized that there were ghettos segregating people, and women were actually kind of locked behind the doors and they were beaten up and discriminated against.
با تعداد زنها رو ملاقات کردم که وقتی که صحبت میکردن میخواستن طلاق بگیرن توی خود سوئد یا اینکه شوهراشون میزدن، وقتی که به پلیس مراجعه میکردن پرونده هاشون زمین گذاشته میشد.
I met many women who were trying to get divorced or to get some justice done in their cases, but they were faced with a law that was discriminatory against them.
همون اوایل شاید قتل ناموسی بودم به دختری به نام لیلا توی شمال سوئد که پسرعموش و برادرش اونو با چاقو زدن. دختر 16-17 ساله‌ای بود ولی هر دو آزاد شدن.
At the beginning, it was at the beginning that I heard about honor killing of a girl, 16-year-old girl, who was killed, and her brother and cousin were finally released.
تصمیم گرفتم که دوباره به مسائل زنان بپردازم و فکر کردم شخصی مثل من که آپارتاید جنسی رو تجربه کرده و قاطی بودن اسلام رو با سیاست و قانون و به قول معروف آموزش باید اینجا کار کنه و برای حقوق زنان خارجی دفاع.
I decided that start to do some activities for women's rights, especially for someone like me who had witnessed sexual apartheid and has seen how getting Islam involved in politics and in power and making it law can affect women's lives, and I decided to fight against it.
اون قانون ازدواج بالاخره من میتونم افتخار کنم که یکی از به هر حال پیشقراولاش ما بودیم، در سال 2002 از بین رفت، ولی الان چیزی رو که میشه گفت جوامع اروپایی رو تهدید میکنه قوانین شریعه است و اون پلتفرمی که دارن این اسلام سیاسی تو دستش گرفته و میخواد موقعیت‌های سیاسی اجتماعی خودش رو جا بندازه، حقوق زنان و بچه‌ها رو تهدید میکنه.
Fortunately, that law, the particular law about marriage, age of marriage, was demolished, and I can say I'm honored that I'm one of the people who had been in front of the line that we have been trying to demolish that. And now we are facing with another law, which is the Sharia law, which is threatening women's lives and freedom in Europe, and they're trying to impose that into the law.
بله، در آخر میخوام بگم که دولت سوئد سازش زیادی با مذهب میکنه، با اسلام سیاسی میکنه و الان محمود آلدبه، امامی که تا به حال خواستار چندین بار پیشنهاد دادگاه‌های شریعه رو در سوئد برده، موفق شده که 2 تا درمونگاه بزنه، یکی برای زنان، یکی برای مردم مسلمان، که این خودش یک نمونه بارزی برای ایزوله کردن مردم و دفاع از قوانین شریعه است.
The Swedish government is making a lot of compromise with the Islamic group, the Islamists. At the moment, Mahmoud Al-Dawe, with one of the Islamic leaders, he's managed to get 2 clinics open, especially for women who are Muslim women who are sick and want to have medical attention.
Okay. Just staying for a moment with the subject of the workings of the Sharia law around the world, before we move on to Europe. We'll move on to Europe and the UK afterwards. Maryam, is this what we're talking about basically? Is it a women's issue? Is it equality as between men and women, the way that women suffer under this law, divorce, the lack of accessibility of it, and so on? Or are we looking wider? Are there other negative effects to this sort of law?
Well, I mean, clearly, I think it goes far beyond a women's rights issue. Obviously, women are one of the first victims of political Islam and Islamic laws. But clearly, as it is being seen across the world, it affects children, it affects men, it affects gays, for example, minorities, religious minorities, political opponents, and so on and so forth. So I think Sharia, because it affects every aspect of people's lives, to the point where what music you listen to can be punished, whether you drink or not, who you have sex with, whether you laugh too loudly, for example, because Sharia law is so involved in every aspect of people's lives, from the most private to the most public, that it does actually involve everybody from a young age to adulthood. So in that sense, I think it's something that does affect all. And clearly, though women, I think there's a huge focus on women, and rightly so, because some of the brutalities of Islamic law is so much more obvious when it comes to women, because they do have to be physically veiled and covered up, and because at many times the laws are first and foremost addressed to them.
Yeah. Ibn, you talked this morning about apostasy, and I guess this is another area that we'll probably revisit to some extent now, because it's another area I understand where Sharia law is incompatible with values of human rights that broadly we adhere to. Other areas that haven't been covered so far that we might want to bring out of the impact of Sharia on people's lives generally?
Yes, so the two groups that suffer the most when Sharia is imposed in Islamic countries are, of course, women and non-Muslim minorities. One notices immediately the impact on groups that are considered no longer Muslim. For example, in Pakistan, the Ahmadiyas are considered as a group apostates, and their rights are curtailed. In Iran, it's the Baha'is, and also Zoroastrians, a dwindling number of Zoroastrians, and of course Jews and Christians. They all, under Sharia, have second-class citizenship. In some cases, they would have to pay a tax, a poll tax, and so on. And one notices where it was immediately noticeable, the impact on the lives of women, when Ziaul Haq, the dictator in Pakistan in the 70s, imposed Sharia, and within 6 months the women population of prisons rose by 300%, where men wishing to get rid of their wives just accused them of adultery, and they were put into prison awaiting trial. This was quite flagrant, and as I said, the non-Muslim minorities.
Children came up very briefly, Maryam, in what you were saying. Before we move on to think more about the European and the UK situations, do you want to expand perhaps on the rights of children in this?
Well, I mean, if you consider the fact that adult women are considered subhuman, really. I mean, I think there's really not much more to say than what Mahin said, where you need the permission of your husband to work, where you don't have access to child custody, to proper divorce, and so on and so forth. You can imagine how children must be. I mean, I think, having just had a child myself, he's 3 now, you realize how powerless children are, really, and how much at the mercy of their parents they are. It's quite frightening, really, and it's so much rides on how child abuse and so on and so forth. You can see how vulnerable children are, and when you have the state actually promoting child abuse, whether it's by forcibly veiling children, by making children veil. I mean, personally, I think that child veiling is a form of child abuse, really, because I think that children don't have a religion. Because I'm an atheist and a communist, my child is not labeled a communist child or an atheist child. But if I was a Muslim, he would immediately be labeled a Muslim child, and he is. He still is, because of the way he looks, even though he's 3. And so in that sense, I think that child veiling is a huge issue, because imagine you have a child of 7, 8 and younger. Oftentimes they're veiled younger, even though supposedly children don't come to an age of maturity at 9. Imagine not having sunlight, being able to touch your body. Imagine not being able to play with boys, being told that you're different and that you need to be covered up. The Islamic regime of Iran is going to such extents where they talk about having different educational books for girls and boys, because they say there are differences between them. They don't need to learn the same things. And in that sense, I think how dehumanizing, how outrageous for a child that, out of no choice of her own or his own, has very often their parents' beliefs imputed on them, but worse when it's the state. Because, to give you an example, if you're beaten in Britain, for example, even though we still need to work hard to ensure that children can't be even smacked in this country, and we haven't gotten there yet, but you have the law which says, abuse of children is wrong. You don't have a right to hit your child. You don't have a right to abuse them. Whereas when you have Islamic laws that actually allow very often this to happen. To give you an example, I worked with a woman who had fled Iran when I was working in New York with Iranian asylum seekers and refugees. And her husband sexually abused their child. And when they went to an Islamic court, the judge told her that the reason the husbands abused their child is because she has not been able to satisfy him. And it was actually her responsibility because of this child abuse. So I think, when the state is complicit in abusing children, in abusing women, in abusing people, it's complicit in dehumanizing them. It's complicit in making barbarity and brutality the norm and acceptable. I think you can just imagine how outrageous it is for children. It's one thing to be labeled a Muslim and be sent to an Islamic school in Europe. I think has just as negative effects. But to live in a state where that is acceptable, the norm, I think it's a very different thing. And I think there are many, many examples of this, and I'm sure people in the audience would have examples of this too. So I think with children in particular, we have an added responsibility, because I think very often children can't speak for themselves, and so we must speak on their behalf. And I think that's why the status of children, whether they're living in a religious family or whether they're living under an Islamic state, needs much more of our attention than it is actually getting.
Okay. Let's move on slightly closer to home, and we'll carry on sketching the broad areas to prepare us the better for comments and questions following. Roy, you've done a lot of work for the humanist movement, especially to international institutions, and I guess in the present climate it's increasingly the case that humanist and secularist organisations or individuals that lobby on these issues are accused of being against Muslims, against Islam. Why are you against Islam is the question that's asked. So why are you against Islam? What's wrong with Islam in Europe, to put it in a hostile way?
Well, I'm not really against Islam. I'm in favour of human rights. All religions, given a free hand, can be oppressive. But the fact is that Islam today is not just another religion. If you look back 50 years and look at the then Islamic countries like Indonesia and Malaysia, you wouldn't recognise them today. The problem that we have is that Islam, modern Islam, has evolved. It's evolved very, very rapidly from what Hassan Fatimullah called the benign Islam of our grandparents. It's evolved following the leadership in the 1940s and 50s of the radical Islamists like Maududi and Qutb and so on. And those very, very authoritarian forms of Islam, Salafism and so on, have taken over, and they've become the dominant strains of Islam, both in the Islamic world and in Europe. This is the problem that we're faced with. Now, as a humanist, we support the right of freedom of religion for everybody, subject to their religion being a private matter and causing harm to no one else or their beliefs. But we do object very strongly to the politicization of religion. We support the complete separation of religion from politics. We need constitutional safeguards in every country to prevent an eventual dictatorship of the majority, because every believer of whatever religion has a vote in Europe. To give special political recognition to any religion or any religious leader is therefore to offer them double representation. So we want to see complete separation of religion and state, and that is a particular problem for Islam.
Right. What is the response to this particular problem from your point of view?
Well, I think, first of all, there is a pretty general lack of awareness of how serious this problem is in Europe. Nick Doody thinks that Islam is a legitimate target for satire, as I'm sure we all do from the response to his act. But this view is not shared by many Muslims. Unfortunately, I don't even believe it is shared by the majority of people in Europe, and certainly not in Britain. There has developed an atmosphere, a climate, where it's become a taboo to insult, to satirize, or to criticize Islam in any way. My own experience internationally in the Human Rights Council shows that not only is it no longer legitimate to criticize Islam, we have been told in the Human Rights Council that we are not to mention Islam. We may not use the word Sharia. Now, this is an international forum. This is the leading human rights institution in the world, which has been completely taken over by political Islam. This is a massive, massive threat to liberal democracy. And this is the issue we're faced with. But no one, the media in this country, no one seems to recognize that we are faced with what my good friend Nasser Carter says, the Third World War. This is a war.
Johann, you've investigated and written on these issues a lot. Roy says this is the big issue, even in Britain and in Europe. Is it that big an issue, really, from your point of view?
I should just preface this by saying that I'm recovering from a stomach bug, so if at any point in this panel I run away, don't think I've spotted a stray suicide bomber or something. It's just slow recovery. I think it's a big issue. I won't call it the biggest issue in the world, but I think it's a very, very big issue. And I think part of the problem is the way we're responding in Europe is we have actually quite a flawed ideological framework, which is multiculturalism. Now, when you criticise multiculturalism, it's very important that you when someone like me criticises it, it's very important to preface it by saying, this is usually lumped in with immigration. You'll hear the right saying, multiculturalism and immigration have caused X, Y, or Z problem. I passionately believe in I wouldn't exist if it were not for immigration. I passionately believe in immigration. I think we need more immigrants and more refugees in this country, not fewer. But I believe it is a disastrous way to welcome them. To say, hello Muslim, you have arrived, here is a Muslim box for us to put you in, where you will be a Muslim forevermore, and you will behave in a way that our appointed Muslim spokesmen, who happen to be extremely reactionary imams, think you should behave. I think we should say, hi, you're here, you want to pay taxes, you want to be British, you're one of us, and we will treat you exactly the same. You are an equal human being, you are not defined by your group. If I can give the most, what I think is the most egregious example within Europe of where I think multiculturalism has gone wrong, let's look at Germany. The German constitution has a requirement, I think a terribly flawed requirement, to respect a person's religion. And I just want to give a couple of quick examples of what that has meant. There was a woman called Zainab, who was a German woman. Her parents had come from Algeria when she was a child. And she got married to a man who was extremely violently abusive. And there was no question about the evidence. He was convicted of beating her and beating her child. And in Germany, you have to be separated for 2 years before you can be granted a divorce. If you want to get it sooner, and obviously she did, she wanted this disgusting man out of her life, you have to go to court. So she went to court. She presented the evidence, no one disputed the evidence, his lawyers didn't dispute the evidence that he'd been violent. The judge, who was a female German judge, came back and said, well, I've looked at this case, and there's no question this man is abusive. But equally, the Constitution requires that I look at your religion. And I've been reading the Quran and the Hadith. And she read out the passage from the Hadith, which actually recommends domestic violence if your wife gets too uppity. And the judge effectively said, well, that's your culture. So for that reason, I'm declining your request. Have a good marriage. This is not an exception. This is not rare in Germany at the moment. There have been a number of so-called honour killings in which women have expressed the freedom that I had taken for granted all my life, to choose my own partner, to behave in any way I want to sexually, and in which the woman's relatives conspired in a premeditated way to murder her. And the verdicts were reduced to manslaughter, and the judge in one case said, I'm doing this because I understand that this woman violated your Anatolian moral precepts. Another example, this is a much smaller example, but I think is very revealing. There was a 14-year-old girl who wanted to go on a school trip. She happened to be, well, she didn't self-identify as Muslim, her family were Muslim. And the school trip was further away than a camel could travel in a day, which is as far as the Quran says you can go from your father. But the girl wanted to go, and her parents wouldn't let her. So the school, entirely to their credit, I don't think a British school would do this, went to court for the right for this girl to go where she wanted. And the judge said, and these were his words, under law, we recognise that a retarded person has to be accompanied by a minor. I see no reason why this should not apply to Muslim women. Now, there is no doubt that judge thought he was being terribly tolerant, and yet it led him to a situation where he was comparing Muslim women to the mentally disabled. The problem with multiculturalism is it puts nice liberal people into alliance with the most profoundly reactionary parts of immigrant communities against the very people we should be siding with. Women who want to live their lives their way, gay people who want to live their lives their way. And the problem with this is as well, it gets tied up with the language of respect. When I criticise Islam, as I criticise Christianity and Judaism and Buddhism, I was even once called fat by the Dalai Lama, I get told, no, you have to respect my beliefs. I respect you as a human being too much to respect your ludicrous superstitions. I do not respect a book that says I should be killed for being gay. I do not respect a book that says Maryam should be killed for being a so-called apostate. Indeed, I abhor that book as I abhor the Bible and the Torah. And it is essential that we retain our freedom to be able to say that. We are finally in this country getting rid of our blasphemy law about Christianity. But at the same time, a de facto blasphemy law about Islam is being introduced, enforced not by the state, but by jihadis. Not very far from here, a brave man tried to publish a book, The Jewel of Medina. It's not a very good book, but it's a valuable book. I've only read extracts from it. And it begins the process that Mark Twain and George Eliot and Bertrand Russell and Spinoza and various people did about Christianity and Judaism. It asks basic questions. Christianity and Judaism have lost their power to terrorize people about masturbation or homosexuality or other perfectly natural things, largely because they've been ridiculed. They've been reinterpreted and they've been ridiculed. It is being made impossible for Muslims to do that. This book, The Jewel of Medina, asks a question that I think would inject doubt into most Muslims' minds. It is a fact, insofar as we can establish any historical facts about the man known to us as Muhammad. At the age of 53, he married a 6-year-old girl, and 3 years later he had sex with her. We don't know if that was common in Arabia at that time. There's some speculation about it. It may not have been. We do know that 9-year-old girls, whatever their culture, wherever they are, do not like being penetrated by 53-year-old men. Now, actually, the Jewel of Medina implies that she enjoyed it. Now, in any other context, that would be shocking. But the very fact that the book discusses that means that the publisher, not far from here, was firebombed. Now, it is essential for Muslims that we're able to question that, because it will actually retain their religion at the most infantilized and backward and terrorizing stage if they can't ask these questions. Imagine what Christianity would look like today if Mark Twain had been pulped and The Life of Brian was impossible to watch, and George Eliot had been banned. It would be this would be a horrible place to live for people like me and a lot of people. Just one other very quick point. Another way of delegitimizing criticisms of Islam is to say that these are Western ideas. So I mentioned Bangladesh earlier. I was in Bangladesh earlier this year. In a children's home, I met a 15-year-old girl. She loved to sing. It was the thing she most loved. And when she turned 11, she was told she couldn't sing anymore because she was a girl and it was disgusting for Muslim girls to sing. And she said to me, that just seemed to me really stupid because this God thing just didn't seem right to me. And I thought, even if there was a God, why would he let boys sing and not girls? Now, she thought of that in a village in Bangladesh, all on her own. It had nothing to do with anyone in the West. I've met gay people in Gaza and women in Baghdad who had exactly the same thoughts. It is a natural thing that if you present a preposterous, superstitious piece of nonsense, naturally there'll be a significant number of people who go, what? That's not right. And the only way you stop them is to terrorise them. That's not Western. That's not about Western values versus anti-Western values. We're talking about culture. Whose culture are we talking about? The culture of Zainab, who wanted a divorce in Germany, or the culture of the man who wanted to beat the shit out of her? Now, we have to make a choice about that culture. It's like saying the culture of the Deep South was slavery. Well, there were some people called slaves who didn't think that was their culture. And a lot of people sided with them, and they prevailed.
Right, everyone on the panel will get the chance to speak again at more length, but I'd like to take some comments from the audience. Whoever has got the roving microphones, can you identify yourself so I can see? Are you over there? Okay. Who wants to make a comment or ask a question at this point? And can I... do you have two of them? Okay. Well, there's someone up there who I'm going to want in a moment. Why don't you start at the front and work your way back? Yes, the lady in the middle there.
I'm Rahila Gupta. I just wanted to point to the fact that there's really a dangerous development going on in Britain at the moment, that Sharia courts under the arbitration legislation are able to function quite freely. I mean, I don't know whether they have just cottoned on to the fact that they are able to exist and to settle disputes, as it were. I think before this there had been a demand from the Muslim community, from the religious leaders, for the setting up of a parallel Sharia law, and obviously and thankfully that didn't go very far. But through the back door it's creeping in, and it's really quite dangerous. Now, without actually affecting all the other kinds of arbitration, I presume, that are allowed to happen in parallel. I presume, for example, the employment tribunals work under the same sort of legislation. How do you actually stop the development of the Sharia courts?
Okay. Yes. Gentleman there, yeah.
Ibrahim Habib, from the Coptic community, the Christians of Egypt. The dangers of Sharia, as we experience it in the Middle East, it touches on every aspect of the human being, the human rights, the citizenship rights. Just one aspect. A few days ago, a Christian guy was killed in Egypt, and the judge in the court, 5 days ago, I think it was during the weekend, he sentenced the murderer to 1 year suspended sentence. In Islam and under Sharia law, one of the things is the lack of providing justice to the minority. In Hadith, and Ibn Warraq can tell us, in Hadith, if somebody is murdered and he is a Muslim, the sentence is murder, or is killing or hanging of the person who killed it. But if he happened to be a non-Muslim, he will be denied justice. There are so many aspects and dangers if Sharia is applied. Gordon Brown said a few months ago that he wanted England to be the capital of the Sharia compatible finance. We do not know when zakah is taken from this compatible Sharia finance. Is it going to Hamas or is it going to somebody else? Most likely the Fatwa Council who decide where this money go from England, it will go to one of these terrorist organizations in the Middle East.
Okay. Okay. The lady at the back there, more on the same theme, I expect.
Oh, Caroline Cox.
Yes.
we already do have Sharia in this
Yes.
country. I've raised this in the British House of Lords. I've challenged the government on it, and their official answer is that every citizen in this land automatically has access to the national legal system of this country. I think anyone in this room will realize that if you are a vulnerable girl in one of our ghettos, there's very little chance of getting out and actually having access to the legal system to which there are certain freedoms attached which are not available in Sharia. The government's response, I believe, is hypocritical, it's disingenuous, and it's dangerous, especially for the women in our Muslim communities in this country. I think we need to rise up and tell the government we do not accept Sharia in this country. We need to protest against it. There was a protest against Sharia law outside Lambeth Palace a little way back. It was not very fully attended. I would like to feel that there is a movement across this country which tells our government that we will not accept a twin-track legal system which denies citizens in this country their fundamental freedoms, freedom to choose and change religion, and freedoms from the kind of abuse which Sharia, we know, does, we've been hearing about, legitimate and permit. Just very briefly, internationally, Canada had Sharia and they managed to get it removed. The United States has a movement to try to stop Sharia coming in. We already have it in this country. We shouldn't have it. And I would like to see a really widespread public demonstration telling this government we will not have a twin-track legal system which denies fundamental human rights. And please come and be very much more active.
Two more. Yeah. This guy here.
Hi. My question is essentially, is Islam ever compatible with modernity? I mean, my understanding of Sharia is that it's, as a term, it's quite a generalization. That there's lots of different. It's based on lots of different law schools and different interpretations of the Quran, the Sunnah, the Hadith. Can there ever be a sort of a re-evaluation? And can Islam sort of ever coexist in modern political or social train of thought?
Okay. And then one more from the guy just behind, or two rows behind. Oh, all right then, yes.
Quick question. Nobody talked. Yeah, you talked about. Sorry, your name.
Roy.
Roy talked about the Council of Human Rights because I think also it was lacking in the announcement of this meeting that we should remember Durban 2, the so-called Durban 2 meeting is coming up, and nobody talks about it here. I read it about that in a Danish newspaper, that it is making criticism of religions a crime against human rights, and one can be persecuted legally for criticizing religions. What I'm asking is, again, as I before said, why not focus on the alliances here? There must be, and I see some strands of it in Iran, Nazi Party of Germany, the existing National Socialist Party of Germany, the Ku Klux Klan ex-wizard, that was a neo-Nazi in New Orleans, Duke, they were all invited and in a very open, official, permanent Holocaust denial and fascist alliance in Iran. So it's open, it's not concealed anymore. Durban 2 is a law. Our governments are sitting behind letting it happen. So I think I need to urge the panelists to explain how they perceive these alliances, international alliances of fascists or totalitarianism, whatever you want to call it, versus freedom lovers or liberals or whatever you want to call it. Because there's, a lot of totalitarianism in the world, and they are actually in the majority now in the governments of the world.
Okay. We'll start with you in the next lot of questions. Okay. I think there's two main issues there. I mean, if you've got specific questions you want to respond to, the two main issues I think that have come out are the fact of arbitration under Sharia in the UK today. I mean, we know that is now being practiced. And the second thing, this broad question, whether Islam is compatible ever with democratic values, human rights values, and I guess the last question was also picking this up specifically on the fact that actually some Islamic regimes have used the language of human rights in various ways to defend their own practices and to say that these are compatible. Let's start with the Sharia tribunals in the UK, and I shall be devil's advocate. These are voluntary undertakings, are they not, that people go into? They are... people want to be governed by this law. Why can't we let them be governed by this law? And isn't it a pragmatic way to build multicultural citizenship in the UK today? Johann, then Maryam, and then anyone else.